Uh, we are going to be talking about the future for funding college education, and we're going to touch upon some of the significant rule changes that affect both present and future borrowers. My name is Nancy Neerman. I am the Assistant Director of the Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program. I'm here with my colleague and the director of the program, Carolina Rodriguez, who's going to be behind the scenes answering questions. And this presentation, we're so happy to have co-sponsored by Kim Nauer of the New School. And I'm going to throw it over to let me actually share my screen, and then I'll throw it over to Kim to do a little bit of an introduction, and we'll do the presentation after that. So give me 1 second. And if you can confirm that you can just see the screen.
Yeah, we can. And then we just need to turn it into
Yeah.
slideshow. Perfect. It looks perfect.
Okay, great.
All right.
So Kim, take it away.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks, Carolina, for inviting me. I'm here just as sort of to be a little bit of a sidekick. I am publisher of a website called understandingfafsa.org, and we do a lot of work with parents and families and counselors around issues associated with financial aid going to college. One of the big issues that we are focused on in a big way this year is college debt and how it's changed under the big beautiful bill, which we'll be talking about tonight. Next slide. And just one little tiny advertisement for our what we have on the website. Obviously, we would love it if you could take a look at the website. It's specifically geared for families who are sending their kids to college. In addition, we have on the website, there's a little top button that says "Get the Guide." We have a guide that's very quick and easy to read for students and parents that are beginning the financial aid process. So I would recommend that you check it out. And we do a lot of really nice explanations of loans and debt there. And that's it. Thanks a lot, Nancy. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Kim. And I know that the New School and your organization, it's a great resource for people who are about to go to college. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation about anything that we're talking about or any other student loan topics, feel free to type them into the Q&A. We use the Q&A, not the chat. Carolina and Kim will be answering those questions behind the scenes, and we will periodically break to share those questions with the rest of the group. Everybody who registered and attended will be getting a copy of the presentation and a copy of the recording. So I wanted to start off a little bit by just telling you about our organization, our program called EdCap. We are a program of the Community Service Society, or CSS, which is a large nonprofit that's been operating in New York City since the 1800s. The EdCap program was created in 2019 specifically to deal with the issue of student debt, which is really at crisis levels in the nation and in New York State. It's a $1.7 trillion issue in the country. It's the second largest consumer debt next to mortgages. In New York State, there are about 2.5 million borrowers who have close to $100 billion worth of debt. So the program was started, number one, because of the size of the issue, and number two, because the systems are incredibly difficult to navigate and have only become more confusing over the last several years with the changes in the political climate and then changes to rules and regulations, which have been sort of constant over the last couple of years. We are a New York State funded program, so all of our services are free, including webinars like this and including one-on-one consultations. So after you've listened to this presentation, if you feel you need to sit down with a counselor to discuss your own situation, you can reach out to us, and there's information at the back of the presentation on how to contact us. I will just give a little bit of a disclaimer here that there's a very high request for our and demand for our services right now, but we do get back to everybody and in time would be able to schedule an appointment with you. Okay. So we're going to start by talking about funding higher education. And we'll move in more into sort of the paying back the loans later on in the presentation. But in terms of the types of aid that are available to students and their families, there is federal student aid, which would be assistance that's provided by the U.S. government. And that includes things like grants and loans, work study programs. Just a caveat here and something to focus on. The word aid, as you can see at the bottom of this deck, of this slide, can be a little bit deceiving because aid does include things like loans. And of course, loans have to be paid back. So all aid is not necessarily free, but it is aid nevertheless that can help you fund the cost of your education. For federal aid, everybody has to start by filling out the FAFSA form, the free application for financial student aid. In New York State, there is also state aid that is provided by the state to students that can help finance, in the most part, for the most part, things like tuition, and that would be the Tuition Assistance Program or TAP, the Excelsior Scholarship, Enhanced Tuition Awards. All are operated under by the Higher Education Servicing Corporation or HESC. Then there is institutional aid. This would be aid that comes from colleges themselves, uh, usually in the form of scholarships or grants. And then, of course, there's just general scholarships that you can seek out, which is basically free money to help you pay for college. And there are literally thousands upon thousands of these things. It can take a little bit of an effort, but it's well worth sort of perusing various scholarships sites because they offer scholarships that are based on a lot of different things. Could be based on merit, could be based on some interests that you have. Sometimes it's based on disabilities. Really, it's a whole range of options for getting scholarships. So, as I said, if you want financial aid, and even if you're looking to get New York State aid, like the TAP awards, you have to start with the FAFSA application. So the deadline for filing the FAFSA is June 30th of the academic year for which you are applying. So if you're applying for the next academic year, and all the academic years start on July 1st and end on June 30th. So the next academic year would start July 1st of 2026, would end June 30th of 2027. So in order to get aid, you have to submit the FAFSA, and you do have up until June 30th of 2027 to get your aid for the 2026-2027 academic year. But of course, you don't really want to wait until the end of the year to get that aid. You want to submit as soon as possible to ensure that the funds are there from the very first time that you plan to enroll and start your semester's work. Um, you must complete this form annually to be considered for federal aid. So that's grants, loans, work study. And then again, you must complete the form annually if you want to follow up and be considered for New York State aid as well. There are two basic federal grants. The one that most people know about is the Pell Grant. Um, and that's going to be based on need, and it can be applied to tuition and room and board. The Pell Grant maximum for the academic year, the academic year that we're currently in, which is 2025-26, is $7,395, so about $7,400. They're supposed to announce the new Pell Grant maximums soon, and but we don't have that information yet. So we wouldn't expect it to be anticipated to be too much more than the 2025-2026, but it should be a little bit higher. The FSEOG maximum, that's a grant that's for people. Both of these are grants uh, given to people with needs. The FSEOG grants are people given to people with extreme needs, and the maximum is about $4,000. Um, the admission versus the financial deadlines. The admission deadlines for your schools may differ from the financial aid deadlines. So you want to check with the schools to make sure you understand when those admission deadlines are and make sure that you get your FAFSA in to meet those deadlines. So very often those deadlines are going to be before June 30th. You want to make sure that you're submitting your aid and your FAFSA applications on time. Okay, a little bit more about New York State aid. So we've got the Tuition Assistance Program, um, or TAP. That allows you to borrow sorry, it doesn't, it's a grant. It's not a loan. It allows you to get up to $5,665 based on your income. There is an income requirement here. It applies to tuition only. Some students can get up to $6,000 with the enhanced tuition award if they participate or if they are attending private schools that participate in that program. The deadline for filing TAP is generally the same for the FAFSA. So it's going to be June 30th of the academic year for which you are applying. And you can apply through FAFSA. At the end of the FAFSA application, it may give you a direct link to the TAP award, or if for some reason that's not working, you can just log on to HESC and do the TAP application there. The Excelsior Scholarship comes after you done your FAFSA and you've gotten your tuition assistance and your TAP award. And what the Excelsior Scholarship does is it provides enough funds to cover the difference between tuition costs, and it's tuition only, and other financial aid that you're receiving for CUNY and SUNY schools. So it's going to look at the total amount of tuition that's covered by Pell, TAP, and if that doesn't cover the entire tuition, the Excelsior Scholarship will kick in. Now, the one thing that you need to know about the Excelsior Scholarship is that there is a working and residential requirement after you graduate. So you must work and or reside in the state of New York for whatever period of time it was that you took out or got or received the Excelsior Scholarship. So if you receive the Excelsior Scholarship for 2 years, you're going to need to work and or reside in the state of New York for 2 years after you graduate. If you don't meet that post-graduation requirement, what the scholarship will essentially turn into a non-interest bearing loan. The deadline for Excelsior right now for the spring 2026 semester is February 3rd. At least it was the other day when I looked on the website. But you want to check the HESC website, and we've got a link to it here when you get the deck, because those deadlines will refresh as we move into other semesters. Okay, so how do you pay for college, and how do you go about the act of basically figuring out what you need to pay for college? So the first thing you have to start with is, what is the cost of attendance? And cost of attendance is not just tuition. Um, Particularly if you're going out of state or if you're looking to live on campus, you're going to have other fees. And the biggest one, in addition to tuition, is going to be room and board, which often can be 30 to 40% of the total cost of the school. The room and board can be very, very expensive. Um, Books and supplies figure 5 to 10% of the cost, and then transportation also 5 to 10% of the cost. And it's not limited to just these things. There are other personal costs that you may want to factor in there. These are not things that you would pay directly to the school necessarily, but it's money that you would have to lay out in order to complete your education. Um, One other thing in the miscellaneous category that what I would want to point out is health insurance. So schools will require that their students have health insurance, and very often you may see health insurance as part of your as part of your bill when you're applying. Just know that if you are already covered, or if you're planning to cover your child and they're going to school in the same state in which you have health coverage, you can waive that health insurance cost, which can be pretty substantial. We're talking thousands of dollars here. If you don't need it, you can waive it, but you must do it on whatever the school sets as the deadline to opt out of that. So you just want to be careful that you understand what that deadline is. And you want to prioritize how you're going to fund the education. So you want to start with basically the free money. So money that doesn't have to be paid back, that's your scholarships, that's your grants. Next, you're going to move down to earned money. That would be work study. Work study programs are offered by the colleges where they provide opportunities for the student to take a job and earn money at that job up to a certain level that's going to be covered by the federal government. But of course, you have to earn the money in order to get it, and that's number one. And number two, the student has to actively seek this out. It's not just going to be offered to them, and they must be willing to do the job. And then you've got the money that has to be paid back. So these are going to be your federal loans in various forms that we're going to talk about in a little while. The plus loans for graduate students, which are going to be phased out, and for parents, where there's going to be new limits. And then last resort, which you should really only do this if you absolutely have to. And if you're going to do it, you want to keep it down to the bare minimum is private loans. All right, so this is a good time to segue into the some of the changes in the new budget bill around surrounding borrowing limits that are going to be options within the federal system going forward. So if you need to take out loans after exhausting all of your other funding options, all the free money, the grant, the scholarships, the work study, you want to consider federal loans first, particularly if you're a student, because federal loans are going to offer better protections, more repayment options, certain forgiveness programs that you're just not going to really find in the private lending world. Um, Now, some of the characteristics of federal loans, the interest rate on federal loans is typically lower than it would be on private loans when you take them out. But the rates on federal loans are going to be fixed throughout the life of the loan. So as time goes on, if interest rates go down in future years, you might find better rates in the private sector. But there are other reasons that you might want to stay in the federal loan sector as well. Some of the things that we just spoke about. But the rates are going to be fixed on your federal loans throughout the life of the loan. For students, there's going to be no credit check or cosigner required for a direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans for undergraduate or graduate school. You can defer your payment while you're in school. No payments until you graduate, leave school, or drop below half-time status. And then there are flexible repayment plans. Now, some of the options are going to be reduced going forward, but still there are going to be options in addition to just paying back the traditional way, which is where you would pay based on the size of the debt, the interest rate, and a predetermined payback period. There are options to pay back based on your income. So if your income is low in comparison to the size of your debt, you would have this option that would be a more affordable plan for you. And then, of course, the big one is that you may be eligible for loan forgiveness if you meet certain criteria. Now, let's talk more nitty-gritty about borrowing limits. So the budget bill, this is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA, that was signed into law in July, is making sweeping changes to the federal student loan system. And one of the biggest changes is to the amount of money that students and parents can borrow going forward. So let's start with the borrowing for undergraduate students. That actually has not changed. The students can borrow for their undergraduate degree annually anywhere from $5,500 to $7,500. If they're a dependent, $9,500 to $12,500 annually if they're an independent student. But there is no change to the current borrowing environment and the current borrowing limits for for undergraduate students. Where the borrowing limit changes kick in is with direct unsubsidized loans for graduate school. So for a master's degree, and I'm going to help you define the difference between master's degree and professional degrees in a minute, but for a master's degree, the annual limit is $20,500. That actually is the same as the current limit. And there's a lifetime limit of $100,000 to get a master's degree. If you're pursuing a professional degree, which is generally going to be things like law or medical degrees, the annual limit is $50,000. The lifetime limit is $200,000. Now, here's why those limits are so important. is the next bullet point. Graduate Plus loans are going to be phased out starting July 1st of 2026. And a Graduate Plus loan, what that did was allowed a student, a graduate student, to borrow up to the cost of attendance. So the limits they might have always there were always limits on the amount that you could borrow for unsubsidized loans to go to graduate school. Um, but you could stay within the federal student loan system if there was a gap between the loans that you had or the aid that you had for your graduate school studies and the total cost of attendance. You could take out a Graduate Plus loan to fund that balance, which would allow the graduate student to fund the entire balance within the federal system. Those Graduate Plus loans are going to be phased out starting July 1st of 2026. So we're looking at just those limits that we just talked about for direct unsubsidized loans. That's the maximum that you're going to be able to borrow for your master's or professional degrees within the federal student loan system. And for anybody that is familiar with this, for these more advanced degrees, that's probably not going to be enough. Certainly, the annual limits may not be enough for you to pursue those degrees. So people are going to have to find other sources of funding. Now, Parent Plus loans is similar concept to Graduate Plus loans. What the Parent Plus loans did was it allowed parents to borrow up to the cost of attendance. So the cost of attendance minus any other aid their dependent child got as a student to fund their dependent undergraduate students' expenses. So you can't take out Parent Plus loans for graduate school. You can only do it for your dependent undergraduate student. Again, this would allowed you to basically fund the entire cost of undergraduate school within the federal system. So they're not eliminating Parent Plus loans, but they are putting limits on them. So there's going to be an annual limit of $20,000 per child, and a lifetime limit of $65,000 per child, and that includes borrowing from both parents. So for people that in the past have looked at going to these very expensive undergraduate schools, so private, not for profit, but private schools, very often you would see the costs sort of exceed the limits that are now going to be in place. So this is going to really cause parents to, you're going to have to think long and hard about where you want your child to go and whether or not you're going to be able to afford the amount of money and what types of loans you may have to take in order to meet the cost of attendance. Now, there is a grandfathering clause. So if you are a graduate or Parent Plus borrower, and the student has at least one direct loan dispersed prior to July 1st of 2026 for the program of study that they're following, you will be able to, you're grandfathered into the old borrowing limits. So you will be able to borrow up to the cost of attendance. So that higher amount of borrowing is allowed for you as long as you meet that criteria. But I want to caution everybody that even though you'll be grandfathered into the old borrowing limits, you will have to pay the loans back under the new rules. And that's going to be a particularly important thing for parent borrowers to pay attention to because the new rules for parent borrowers are very much restrictive, and there's not a lot of options there. We're going to go into that in a few minutes. So this is the undergraduate student loan federal limits. I won't go over this in detail. You can look at this when you get the deck. But this is what has not changed. This is currently available and will continue to be available when the new rules go into effect in July. Parent Plus loans for dependents undergraduate education. In case people are not familiar with this, if you're hearing this for the first time, they're available to biological, adoptive, or step parents. For a dependent student that's enrolled at least half time at a school that participates in the federal student aid program. So a school that's eligible for federal aid. Parent Plus loans, all Plus loans, including the Graduate Plus loans, require a credit check, but it's not as stringent a credit check as you would get if you went to a private institution. Um, as I said, how much you can borrow starting July 1st of 2026. You'll only be able to borrow up to the $20,000 per child or 65 per year or $65,000 lifetime cap per child. Loans dispersed prior to July 1st of 2026 can cover up to the cost of attendance minus other aid, as long as you have a direct loan that's dispersed for the program of study the student is looking to complete. For Parent Plus loans, you can request deferment while the student is in school. The repayment term is going to be based on the loan balance for a traditional repayment plan, and that's going to be anywhere from 10 to 25 years, depending on your debt balance. But here's what's key with Parent Plus loans. Starting July 1st of 2026, you will have no options for to take out loans uh, to repay loans based on your income. So there's no income driven repayment plan options if you take out any loans starting July 1st of 2026. Other things that you want to know about Parent Plus loans is that the parent is legally responsible for the payment, not the student. We get this question a lot from parents that come to us and their child has graduated and they want to assign or transfer the Parent Plus debt back to the student. You cannot do this. You can have an agreement with your child to help you repay the loan, but you cannot. But the loan is going to be your legal responsibility. It will never be the legal responsibility of the child. Interest is going to accrue even during the deferment. Of course, you can always make payments on that interest if you choose to. Um, and you want to consider you want to take out as much for your child in federal student loans and grants first before considering borrowing a plus loan. You want to minimize the plus loan borrowing as much as you can, which can be difficult because frankly the federal the federal student aid for the student itself, the loans are not huge usually, sometimes in comparison to the cost of attendance of the school. For graduate students, this is a more extensive list of what professional degrees now will meet the lifetime limit requirements for borrowing up to $200,000. It's a list of these 11, plus there may be a broader list where there are broader definitions, things like it has to be at a doctoral level, requires professional licensure, and certain number of additional years of study beyond the bachelor's degree. But largely, these degrees are going to be in medicine, legal degrees, and of course, there's one in theology. The couple that are left out of these borrowing limits, these professional borrowing limits, are things like any kind of nurse. If you're studying to be a nurse or a nurse practitioner or physician's assistant, that is not going to meet the definition of a professional degree for student loan borrowing. You can still borrow under the master's degree, but not under the professional degree. Also, social workers don't qualify, and people going for masters in education will not qualify for these higher amounts. And then, of course, there's private loans. Again, you want to really try to avoid the private loans to whatever extent that you can. These are loans that are going to be offered by banks, credit unions, private institutions. They're not required to follow the rules that are set forth for the federal student loans. Credit checks are required, and it's going to be like a regular credit check. But most students wind up having to get a cosigner because they really don't have credit, particularly for their undergraduate degrees. And that usually winds up being the parent, but it can be any adult who is interested in helping out the student. One thing that's key here is a cosigner is 100% liable for the loan if the primary borrower, being the student, defaults. And it can be difficult to get yourself released if you are a cosigner on the loan. It's not that you can just ask to be released. Usually, if they offer a cosigner release at all, there's going to be some period where the student is going to be required to demonstrate that they can pay the loan back before they're going to release the cosigner. Interest rates are determined by prevailing market conditions and also by the credit worthiness of the applicants. So again, you really want to make this your last resort of funding. Try to avoid it at all costs because they're very limited. There's limited flexibility with these loans. When you get the loans, it's either pay or default. Okay, I'm going to stop there and Carolina or Kim, see if there are any questions or things that you want to bring up and highlight?
Yeah, so that was a lot. I want to just say
As
that
always.
we recognize that was a lot. So, a reminder, you can put any questions you may have in the Q&A and we can answer them behind the scenes. I want to just throw in my two unsolicited cents for perspective. Um, just room and board right now can be 25,000. I just heard that a private nonprofit in New York next year, it's going to be 28,000. So that's the ballpark, right? So if you are trying to go to an undergrad and you're going to be living on campus, let's go with 25,000. 25,000 times four, that's 100,000. When it comes to an undergrad degree, there's obviously some federal loans the student themselves can borrow, but it's going to be limited. And then the parent would only be able to borrow in federal loans up to 65,000 max. So you can already see that there needs to be a lot more planning and thought on how to finance college in light of the one big beautiful bill. It used to be in the past that you can basically, as Nancy mentioned, borrow whatever you needed to cover the cost of education, whether you were an undergrad or a graduate student. So, in theory, someone can get a full ride for tuition, but if they don't get room and board cover, for example, you can already do the math and you can see your options. Am I saying only apply, only accept this score, that school? Absolutely not. I think the strategy, and others might agree or disagree, is to apply and make sure that you carefully evaluate your financial aid award letters because some students may get scholarships. Make sure that you ask around with the institution whether that's a 1 year or a 4 year scholarship. What are the requirements on those scholarships? You don't want to be caught by any surprises. Now, one thing that I want to flag, and again, this is based on conversations I'm having with financial aid directors, is when you agree to go to a school, do the math. If you think you're going to need to borrow private loans, know that unlike federal loans, which have a soft touch on credit, with private loans, they're going to be evaluating your credit worthiness. And when I say yours, it's usually the cosigner, right? They're going to look at the student, but the student doesn't have the employment or credit most of the time. So they're going to be looking at the cosigner and realize that if you have other type of debt, you may be able to borrow to cover what you need in private loans um, for the first year or second year, but you may end up in trouble the third or fourth year if you already have other sources of debt in comparison to your income. So, not to scare anyone, but I do encourage people to take that extra step to really evaluate, okay, how much would we need to borrow in federal loans given the caps? If we needed to borrow private loans, what are the odds that we can pay or borrow and qualify to borrow for the length of the program? Obviously, I was just focused on undergrad and parents, but same thing. If you're going to graduate school, you need to do the math because the last thing you want to do is enroll in a program that by the second or third year, you've maxed out your options of borrowing, including federal and private. So, I hate to be Debbie Downer, but getting ahead of the game means that you are really evaluating your financial aid award letters and understand the new loan caps and your options potentially for private loans because it's going to be critical. Now, Nancy's going to talk soon about loan repayment because that's another component that it's not only can I borrow this money, the next critical question is can I repay this money? And if so, what is it going to take from a monthly payment perspective and from a length of time perspective? Are you going to be repaying this debt for 10 years, 20 years? Because that's going to be a key factor, again, in deciding on which program is best for you.
And I
Yeah.
just want to just real quick just pop in a couple quick things. First, it's very important to everyone on the call to start to be willing to start talking to their children or about what the family's budget is. And the earlier that happens, the better. Ideally, you want that to happen before the student starts creating their college list. We've seen a lot of families get into trouble because of falling in love with certain schools that there's no way that the family can afford, yet they choose to take out the loans and do it anyway. So the time to talk about the cost of college and what is the family can afford, I always say is you really have to start those talks. I know it's a little bit late for many of you in ninth grade, and to just start getting comfortable with this with your children. They are up for talking to you about it. So it's you got to be proactive. And one super question, Nancy, that I've always confuses me a little bit. The $65,000 Parent Plus loan limit
Mhm.
does per student. Does that it's just Parent Plus, or when you talk about those loan limits, is that's not including any of the loans that the students themselves took out as student loans, right?
Correct. It's
Okay,
in addition. It's
it's an
just Parent
addition.
Plus loans, but
Okay,
it's going to look at any Parent Plus loans starting July. They're going to look at any Parent Plus loans that you might have already taken out. So if you've already taken $50,000 for your student, you basically have $15,000 left for the lifetime of that student.
okay, that's an excellent clarification. Okay, amazing, and I will let you get back to your magic.
Oh, okay, Carolina, you're done.
Well, I was just gonna say on that note, unless you're a grandfather, right?
Unless your grandfather, right? Which we just talked about the
Yeah.
grandfathering, but um, I do want to mention that I know they talked, both Kim and Carolina were talking about making sure you understand what it is that you're going to have to borrow and whether or not you can pay it off. We're developing some tools. I have a screenshot of them in the back of this presentation that's going to help you do that. They're not up on our website yet, but they will be shortly. So to make it a little bit easier for you to come and make these decisions. Okay, let's talk a little bit about loan repayment for future borrowers. And this is really with the focus of making sure that Parent Plus borrowers understand what's going to be happening. So, anybody that takes a new loan or consolidates an existing loan on or after July 1st of 2026 is going to be limited to the following repayment options. If you're a student borrower, you'll have one income-driven repayment plan that you're eligible for. It's called the Repayment Assistance Plan or RAP plan. It's not available yet, but it should be available by July. And then you'll have one traditional repayment plan. A traditional repayment plan is like paying back a mortgage or an auto loan. The payment's based on the balance, the interest rate, and a payback period. And that's what we're calling the new standard fixed repayment plan. So that's it. As a student borrower, you're only going to have two options. If you are a Parent Plus borrower, and as I said, you take or consolidate a loan on or after July 1st, you are only going to have one option. And that means you're only going to be able to pay back in the traditional repayment plan. You will not be able to pay these loans back in a payment plan that's based on your income. And as a result, basically, you are shut out from pursuing most of the big forgiveness programs like public service loan forgiveness or IDR forgiveness. There is a rule in the budget bill that says all loans must be repaid under the same repayment plan where possible. And this applies to both student loans and to Parent Plus loans. So again, going back, starting on July 1st of 2026, if you take any new loan, then all your loans, including the ones that are dispersed before July 1st of 2026, you must follow those rules. Student borrowers, you get RAP and new standard plan. Parent Plus borrowers, you pay all the loans back under the new standard plan. The Parent Plus borrowers are not going to be eligible for the RAP plan, even if you consolidate your loans. Now, the only exception to this is if you have both student loans for yourself and Parent Plus loans, you can pay the student loans back in the RAP plan. The Parent Plus loans you'll have to pay back in the standard plan. Now, repayment plans for what we're calling legacy borrowers. Legacy borrowers are people who are done borrowing before July 1st of 2026. So you're going to have a lot more options as long as you position yourself carefully and correctly. So as a student borrower, you're going to have right now you have access to the income-based repayment plan, then and two other existing one I'm talking I'm going to say the word income-driven repayment or IDR, and that's the umbrella term for these other plans that we're going to be talking about. So right now you can enroll in IBR, you can enroll in ICR and PayE. ICR and PayE are going to be available until July of 2028, after which they will be phased out. Student borrowers will also, as long as you have direct loans, will also be eligible for the new WRAP plan that we just talked about when that becomes available. In terms of traditional plans, there's actually a whole host of different traditional plans. You may see them as standard, graduated, extended. Um, that will continue to be available to you as a legacy borrower. Again, that may offer you some more options, but still, these are the plans that are based on the size of the debt. For Parent Plus borrowers, so this is legacy Parent Plus borrowers, meaning you're done with borrowing. All your loans are dispersed before July 1st of 2026. You will have access to the ICR plan while it still exists, and eventually the income-based repayment plan. But there are some steps that you're going to have to take, and we're going to talk more about what you have to do to make sure that you retain that eligibility. You'll also have access to the same traditional repayment plans that the student borrowers have access to. Now, what is the new standard fixed plan? And again, this is going to be just the one traditional plan for new borrowers going forward. The payment is going to be based on your loan balance, interest rate, and a payback period that falls somewhere between 10 and 25 years, depending on your debt size. And the schedule is here over to the right. So anything below $25,000, you have to pay it back in 10 years. If you're borrowing between 25,000 and just under 50,000, you get 15 years to pay that off, and so on and so forth. $100,000 or more, you get 25 years to pay that off. Under the current system, for these traditional repayment plans, you may have up to 30 years to pay a loan off, depending on the loan balance. The minimum payment is going to be $50 if the calculated payment is less than that. These plans are not eligible for forgiveness programs like PSLF or IDR forgiveness. Payments in the standard 10-year repayment plan are eligible for these forgiveness programs, but you would have to switch to an IDR plan to actually realize forgiveness, because you would pay it off in a 10-year standard plan before you'd actually have anything to forgive. If you want to enroll in any one of these plans and you're not consolidating your loans, you just need to call the servicer and do it. If you don't select a plan, this is going to be the new default repayment plan. Okay. This is just some examples of what you might have to pay, what the monthly payment would look like, and what the totals you would be paying. This is based on an interest rate of 6.5%. Obviously, these numbers change if your interest rate is higher or lower. But just as an example, if you're borrowing more than $100,000, the monthly payment is going to be a minimum of $675 if your interest rate is 6.5%. In total, over the 25 years, you're going to be paying about a little more than $202,000, of which about half of that is interest. So if you're paying back in a traditional repayment plan, or if your goal is to just pay the loans off, you're not pursuing a forgiveness program, the faster you make the payments, the more money you'll save in terms of interest. It may mean that you have to make more aggressive payments on a monthly basis, but you'll save over the life of the loan because you're saving on interest payments. But this is the kind of thing that you're going to want to know up front to know whether or not you can afford the monthly payment, and whether or not you really want to have this loan and this debt staying with you for 25 years, particularly if you're a parent. Now, the repayment assistance plan, or the WRAP plan, that's the new plan that's based on income. The payments are going to be 1 to 10% of your adjusted gross income, with a minimum of $10. You'll get a $50 deduction for any dependent that you claim on your tax return. Some of the good things about the RAP plan is that the unpaid interest is not going to accrue like it does on existing income-driven repayment plans. So if your payment doesn't cover the interest, which often it doesn't, when your balance is high and your income is moderate, the interest will be basically subsidized by the government. So you won't see your balance increase, which is often the case with current plans. You will also get a $50 monthly principal subsidy if your monthly payment doesn't pay your principal down by at least that much, as long as you're making whatever the required payment is. In terms of spousal income, if you're married, that can be excluded for the purposes of calculating the payment in this plan if you file your taxes separately. It is eligible for public service loan forgiveness, which is a 10-year path to forgiveness, or IDR forgiveness. But the IDR forgiveness schedule in this plan is 30 years. That's 5 years longer than the longest forgiveness period in the current plans. So it's a long time to be uh, paying off a student loan. The income-based repayment, or IBR plan is going to be available for individuals who do not take out any loans on or after July 1st. And there are different calculators. We have a calculator on our website where you can compare all the different plans. Now, I did want to say a word about the income-based repayment plan, or IBR. Again, this is going to be available to any existing borrowers who do not take out any new loans on or after July 1st of 2026. Um, you can use Payee and ICR right now. Um, until they are phased out in July 2028. After that, you would be transitioned into the income-based repayment plan, or IBR plan. This is also going to be available to Parent Plus borrowers who are done borrowing and take other steps. So for the IBR plan, there is no income test. There used to be an income test on this plan that doesn't exist anymore. Payments are capped, so you would never have to pay more than the cost of a standard 10-year fixed repayment plan. It's eligible for IDR forgiveness and PSLF. The payment calculation differs. There's two different versions of the plan. If you have any loans dispersed before July 1st of 2014, it's calculated at 15% of discretionary income, and then there's a 25-year path to forgiveness. If your first loans were dispersed on or after July 1st of 2014, 10% of discretionary income and forgiveness after 20 years. So student borrowers can also choose the RAP plan or the existing traditional plans as well, if as long as they're a legacy borrower. All right, so let's talk about Parent Plus loans for a minute, because this is an important thing for everybody to understand.
Nancy,
It,
before you go there, can I just ask a
yes.
question? Okay. So the question is, in the new standard plan, will extra payments be applied to the principal first?
If you request that, yes, as long as you don't have any unpaid interest balance. So remember, whenever you're making a student loan payment, if there's any unpaid interest that you haven't paid from previous years, um, the payment is going to pay that off first before it touches principal. But let's say, for the sake of this example, you don't have any unpaid interest, and let's say your monthly payment is $500, of which $100 is applied to interest. And let's say you decide to pay $1,000. Um, if you decide to pay $1,000 and you direct the servicer to apply the excess to principal, $100 is going to be paid to interest because every month it accrues interest, and then the extra $900 would be applied to principal. But the key thing is that you do have to ask and request the servicer to apply the money in that manner. Otherwise, what they may do is put you in what they call pay ahead status. And what pay ahead status does is it just simply pays the next bill ahead of time, and then you wouldn't get a bill, let's say, for the next month, and they would bill you the month after. But it just pays the next month's bill, which includes an interest component. So whenever you want to apply excess payments, the general goal is to pay the debt down quicker and pay less interest. If you're in pay ahead status, it won't achieve that. So as long as you call the servicer and request that they apply it to principal, that's what will happen.
And I can add that one, there's no prepayment penalty, right? So you can pay your
Correct.
student
Right.
loans at any time. Two, most servicer websites allow you to direct extra payments and apply them how you want it. So, like to a specific loan. So sometimes, like a lot of the loans that we see, the interest rate between one loan and the next is not too huge of a difference. But in some cases, we see that some loans are like at a higher interest rate that we're like, well, if your plan is to pay them off and you're making lump sum payments or extra payments, then we would recommend you allocate any extra payments to the highest interest rate loans. Not gonna make like huge difference, but it can help. So again, you can probably do that with the servicer website. You just want to monitor to make sure it was properly applied because you probably want to avoid the pay ahead status. It just gets
Yeah.
confusing and it leads to other issues.
And it doesn't achieve the goal that you really
Trying to do that.
are setting out to
Thank
achieve.
you.
Okay. Um, so Parent Plus bars, you still have a path to income-based payments. Again, these are legacy borrowers. You're done borrowing, no more loans dispersed on or after July 1st of 2026. But there are certain steps that you may have to take. So number one, and this is the key one, if you have direct Parent Plus loans that are not consolidated, you must consolidate before July 1st of 2026. And that doesn't mean that you can submit the application to file by that date. The actual consolidation has to be completed by that date. And consolidations generally take a couple of months to complete. So to err on the side of caution, we are telling everybody apply to consolidate your Parent Plus loans no later than the end of March of this year to ensure you have enough time to make sure that they are fully consolidated before July 1st of 2026. After you consolidate, assuming you make the deadline, you must enroll in the ICR plan. The ICR plan was the only income-driven repayment plan available to Parent Plus borrowers who consolidated under the old rules. And you must make at least one payment in the ICR plan. And that can be a little bit painful. I'm not going to lie because ICR in most cases is a very expensive plan, but you just need to make one payment in ICR, after which you can then switch to the income-based repayment plan or IBR plan, which for the vast majority of borrowers is going to be cheaper. If you don't switch by the time that ICR is phased out on July 1st of 2028, then you'll be moved into the IBR plan. So the key thing that you need to make sure that you do is get those loans consolidated before July 1st. You do not have to enroll in ICR and make that payment before that date. You would just have to do that before the ICR plan is phased out, and that's not until the middle of 2028. The key thing is get the loans consolidated to make sure that you don't miss that deadline. If you don't get the loans consolidated in time, you're going to be limited to just paying back in the traditional or standard plan, the new version. So you can only use the new standard repayment plan for all your new repayment plans. So loans taken out or consolidated on or after July 1st of 2026. Only the standard repayment plan applies, and it will apply to all your Parent Plus loans, even loans you had previously taken out. Consolidation does not open up the income-based options like it did in the past. So you're not going to have access to any of the income-driven repayment plans, and you're going to have no path to things like public service loan forgiveness or IDR repayment forgiveness. Now, you will still have access to things like total and permanent disability discharge, and maybe some other types of discharges, but not the big forgiveness programs. Okay. So basically, the action steps, if you are a legacy Parent Plus borrower, that you may need to take is number one, if your loans are not consolidated, get them consolidated. Particularly if you're taking out loans for the spring 2026 semester. So those loans should be dispersed sometime in January or early February. You want to consolidate as soon as possible. So sometime by March, you should be able to consolidate those. And then if you have defaulted Parent Plus loans, now's the time to consolidate and remove them from default and enroll them in an IDR plan, get yourself set up so that you will retain access for these income-driven repayment plans. If you do plan to borrow Parent Plus loans on or after July 1st of 2026, like we said, all of the debt's going to have to be repaid under the new standard plan. If you're kind of in the middle of this of borrowing, like let's say your child is in their junior year right now, and they're going to be applying for senior year. So you've borrowed 3 years worth of payments, um, and you need to just borrow for one more year. As a Parent Plus borrower, you may want to consider, believe it or not, the option of taking out a private loan to fund that last year of schooling so that your existing debt retains access to IDR plans, particularly if you're pursuing forgiveness programs like PSLF. Um, so that's something we understand that this is complicated and you have to get this right because it's going to dictate how this goes for you for the for after July 1st of 2026. So you can reach out for a consultation if this sounds like something that you are interested in. So just some special considerations, and we're almost done here. Some tips for making sure that you're keeping the costs down. You want to analyze your awards letters and make sure that you completely understand what it is that you're going to do, the costs that are going to be incurred by you to fund your education or your child's education. You want to calculate the total cost of attendance. The net cost is cost of attendance minus any grants and scholarships that you will receive. And then ultimately, you're going to determine how much funding you're going to need to fund the gap between the net cost and the sorry, between the to fund any funding gaps that you may come up with. Um, Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. I mentioned a little bit earlier that we were developing some tools that may help you with some of these things. This is an online financial aid awards letter analysis tool. You can find these elsewhere on the internet, but we are also going to have one that looks like this on our website, which is very relatively easy to use. You just plug in the numbers. It's going to tell you and calculate the net cost. You'll plug in how much you get in terms of student loans, federal student loans, work study, any family resources that you can contribute. And then the funding gap is going to be the difference between the net cost. It's going to be the net cost minus any of these other items that you put in here. And so you can see actually if you got you can't really only look at the top line cost of attendance because you can have schools with the same cost of attendance, but it's going to cost you a different amount of money based on the amount of scholarships and awards that you're entitled to. So it's a useful tool. And once you understand what that number is, how much it is you're going to have to borrow, um, we're going to offer this tool where you can plug in your year one borrowing, answer some questions about how long it's going to take to fund the education, and get a big picture of what it's going to look like. Let's say this is for a child. You were taking out plus loans for a child who's going to finish their education in 4 years. It's going to tell you what your total dollar amount is going to be at the end of the 4 years, going to give you an average interest rate, and what the payment is going to look like in that standard fixed repayment plan for Parent Plus borrowers. So I think this is going to be a really handy tool to help you make the decisions that you need to make about funding college going forward. And then very quickly about delinquency, default, and collections, because it's a big topic here. So federal student loan default happens when you are 9 months late on your payments. After 30 days, late fees are applied. After 90 days of missed payments, you get reported to the credit agencies, but you don't go into default until you're at least 9 months, basically, in delinquent on your student loan payments. At that point, the debt's payable in full and immediately, which of course is a non-starter. There's no access to IDR plans, no credit towards forgiveness, no access to federal student aid if you're looking to further your education. And then, of course, the key thing is that you're subject to involuntary collections, which could be refund intercepts, administrative wage garnishment, and Social Security offsets. It is possible to avoid all of this if you bring your loans out of default in a timely manner. If anybody is in default, we know that wage garnishment is starting up. Tax refund intercepts, you can expect those to happen if you're still in default during tax season. You want to reach out for help. And that's it. I'm going to end right there. So Carolina, do you want to finish up? Are there any other questions or things that we need to address?
So there were no more questions. So I want to obviously give people the opportunity to. Oh, it's. I think we can allow if anyone has any questions and you want to raise your virtual hand if you want to ask the question, we can probably unmute you, or you can again type it in the Q&A. And let me make sure I am looking at the attendee and
I'm looking at the attendees. I don't see any hands just
okay.
yet. So
um No, no questions. So I put our contact information, and you can see the our contact information is there on the slides. You're gonna get a copy of this presentation, a copy of the recording, and you can reach out to us. I will mention that all of our services are free. How do you apply for Parent Plus loans? That is such a great question that we should make sure we always answer. Nancy?
so you would apply during you would apply basically you apply online on the FAFSA portal. You're going to want to wait obviously until the student has submitted the FAFSA application, and then you've done everything that we've just talked about. Looked at the college, you get the college awards letters, you've done the analysis, you figured out what school you want to go to, then you can submit the application online. It's called the Parent Plus Master Promissory Note, which you can fill out online.
Can I
Um,
say something about that? So, the reason why you in part have to wait to get like the financial aid information is because that's going to determine, aside from the loan caps, how much you can borrow. So traditionally, it has been like, what is the financial unmet need? And so in part that could have repercussions. Now, the new loan caps probably restrict it even more, but you should be able to get some instructions from your school, but as Nancy mentioned, you can always just go to studentaid.gov. It is the same website where you're applying for FAFSA. So there's plenty of information there. And if you have any questions at any point, you can also reach out to us. I think I was just saying, all of our services are free. And when we say you can have a consultation, it's not like have a consultation and then we'll ask you for payment or anything like that. Absolutely not. We are here to support you, and especially given all these rule changes, I think it's kudos to you for attending the session. I think you're ahead of the game, and it's possible it's still really important for people to go to college. So we want to just make sure that people make informed decisions. A big thank you to Kim from the new school for co-hosting this event. We really appreciate it, and thank you, Nancy, for presenting a lot of information.
It's amazing, amazing amount of information, and hopefully everybody can digest that and study up. It's all worth it.
or at the very least, it will help you go to sleep tonight. So
Yeah.
anyway, well, thank you. Oh, we have one more question. If you met with a counselor before, you can schedule a follow-up session. Oh, okay. This looks like somebody's. What if our counselor has no slots available to book? It looks like the calendar. Okay. Yeah, we're actually in the process of opening the calendar to extend it a little bit further. But if you're having any trouble booking online, you can call our helpline at 1-888-614-5004, or you can email us at the EdCap email program email, and we'll respond to you and try to fit you in, particularly if you have an urgent issue.
Yeah, but if you've met with a counselor before, just email that counselor. Let them know
Okay,
that there's
and
no
there's that as well.
availability. I
Yeah.
have a feeling that's probably me. So please, if that's me, email me. I will find time for you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And thanks again, Kim.
All right.
Have
Thank
a
you
great
guys.
night.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. Take good care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.